Okay, let's talk a little bit more about levels. Going back to the the levels of language proficiency, I'd like to direct you to a resource on your handout. It's on the page after the quick write and the anticipatory set. These are from WIDA, the consortium that designed the access test. WIDA has also designed many other resources for us to use in the classroom, for anyone who works with ELLs to use in the classroom. And this is a resource that I found really helpful in working with teachers and helping them really embed strategies for working with different levels. In other words, working with students who come to us with different levels of language proficiency. These are called the can-do descriptors. And what they do is they really break down the levels and look at the 4 domains of language. Language is comprised of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as we know. And so essentially what you can do is look at this tool and think about if you have a level 2 student in your class, for example, who needs extra support in reading and writing. Here are some ideas of how to scaffold or modify or accommodate, rather, what it is that they can, how to provide access for them in the content area. Okay, so if you can see here, this is a continuum all the way to level 5. If they're doing the same learning target, the reading and writing assignment that you give can be different based on their language level. So here at level 2, it says identify facts and explicit messages in reading, so they can identify. Whereas a level 5 might be able to do some more drawing conclusions. Okay, we don't want to water down the content. So we still want to give them high-level content, but we might modify what they have to do with the content if they're really at this beginning level of learning the language. And then here, looking at writing, they can produce some writing. We know that level 2s can produce some. We don't want to get hung up on errors, and we want to make it reasonable for them. Here it says phrases, short sentences, notes. Very reasonable. Again, keeping the content rigorous, but then modifying how we allow them to show their knowledge. And then if you look here at level 5, they'd be doing multiple forms of writing. They'd be looking at genres, doing a much more higher level language tasks. So what I've done with content area teachers is have them print this out and stick it in their lesson plan binder, or put it on the wall next to where they do their lesson planning. And when they're thinking about activities that they're embedding in their lessons for ELLs, especially for the lower levels, the mid to lower levels, there's some really good ideas here about how to break them down. So just because they may not be able to speak yet, they can still do some things, okay? Lots of things that they can do. I like the verbs here. This is kind of where I've looked at in order to help students who need a little bit extra support. Okay, so going back to here, let's remember that ELLs are doing double the work, really, of what our non-ELL peers are doing, students whose native language is English. They're not just learning the content like everybody else is, but they're also learning the language. And this is where it's really key to remember that all teachers are language teachers. All of us are. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everybody's really working on teaching the content, but being careful in modifying the language for ELLs. And anybody can do this. It doesn't take a degree in ESL or a certification in ESL. There's some simple strategies that we can embed to help minimize the language barrier. Keeping strategies in mind, let's take a look at this. 2 other factors that are really, really important, not just the levels, but other principles of second language acquisition. Stephen Krashen's the guy who theorized these, and there's a lot more that you can read about it if you're interested. But basically, it comes down to comprehensible input, making sure that the input that we give the input that we give students is comprehensible. And the other piece is the affective filter. This has to do with the brain and emotions. We've talked about it before in this module, that when kids feel stressed out, their brain actually blocks learning. This is so true with all kids, especially true with ELLs, because it's already really, really difficult and you're working on a very high cognitive level when you're acquiring another language. And so any way that we can decrease stress will really bring that affective filter down and allow them to learn much, much better. It makes them feel good too. But instructionally, we have to be aware of comprehensible input. And what this means, as I said, is the the input or the instruction that we give them is not impeded by language barriers. And there's two different ways we can do this. We can do it linguistically, and we can do it non-linguistically. And I'd recommend both at all times. And you can't do all the strategies at once for linguistic and non-linguistic input, but you can keep them in mind, and you'd be surprised of all the things that you're probably already doing. And then maybe you'll get some ideas here too. So linguistically is what it is that we say. So we want to simplify our speech. We talked about idioms before, and pre-teach vocabulary. Those are some basic ways that we can linguistically support learning. Graphic organizers are also really, 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 really useful for any content area. Giving kids Cornell notes or a web or some kind of place to organize their thinking will really help the language fall into place and help them focus on content. The non-linguistic strategies are a lot of the hands-on kinds of things that are good for all kids as well. Using visuals, demonstrations, realia. Realia means actual artifacts. Like, for example, if I'm teaching about steel, industrialization in steel, I would bring in some examples of steel objects. And I would try to show videos, maybe try to demonstrate what it is that I'm teaching so that it's really comprehensible to the students. Now let's shift gears and talk about culture. We can't ignore the impact of culture in how we acquire a language, because language is attached to culture. And many of our students are from other countries, definitely from other cultures besides the mainstream culture that we have in the United States. And as they move here, especially newcomers, those that are new to our country, they go through this very specific set of stages, developmental stages, in order to actually be acculturated. And those of you who are mentors or learn about any kind of new culture adjustment, you'll recognize this as the way that we see beginning teachers, as all of us who has begun in the profession really go through these stages until we feel comfortable with what we do. The first stage, as you can see, is a honeymoon, when everything's great. You're in a new country and it's just fun and fabulous. But then soon after that, you really hit culture shock. What am I doing here? How do I operate? This is so much harder than I thought. I know when I lived in another country, and I lived in Puerto Rico for a couple years, the honeymoon stage was great, and culture shock was extremely difficult for me. I missed everything about my home country, everything. And it was extremely difficult just to find that joy that I had when I first arrived. But after a while, what we do is we start adjusting. We start coping. We find ways to deal. The language gets easier, hopefully, and people are reaching out, and we've created a support network here, and we start feeling successful. Finally, the goal is mastery, is really trying to feel very comfortable in our new place. If you would like to learn more about culture shock, I recommend this video. And it's also, the website is also at the end of your handout. On the last page, you're going to see a list of videos here of that goldfish barking video. This culture shock one is really good. I believe it's from UC Berkeley, if I remember correctly, where international students are talking about culture shock. It's quite funny and quite true. And then we'll talk about this last video clip later. But we cannot underplay enough the role of culture. We like the iceberg concept of culture because it talks about, or it shows us these things on the surface that we might think are culture. Okay, like some of our, the more obvious things, like the food that we might eat if we're from a different country, the arts that we have, the dance, celebrations, holidays, things like that. And that's really easy as far as adjustment, and like that can be part of the honeymoon phase, is really enjoying those things from another culture. But what's deeper and not seen, and definitely more emotional for all of us, is all the values. As you can see, patterns, preferences, concepts, roles, all sorts of things, as you can see here, are very complex. And those of us in the dominant American culture, we might not even realize that we have our own culture that embodies all of these things specific to where we come from. And our students who are coming to us from other countries and other cultures really have different deep culture, unspoken rules and unconscious rules. And again, keeping in mind that this is the part in the culture shock phases, this is the part that takes a long time to become acculturated in. And many of our students are stuck between two cultures because they're learning how to be American, but they have their home culture, which they may or may not be proud of, and they're trying to negotiate between two worlds. It's very, very difficult. And I really encourage you, if you're interested in this more and you find that this is something that would be important for you as an educator to learn about, I would encourage you to have a conversation with your ESL teacher and get some more information about specific cultures of students. We don't want to stereotype. So for example, if we have a student from India, we don't want to make certain assumptions about deep or surface culture. And even knowing that in India there's hundreds of languages and many different kinds of cultures within that gigantic subcontinent. So we really want to be careful about getting to know the specific cultures through the students that we serve. And researching can help, so going online and looking things up, that can help too. But again, be careful of not pigeonholing or stereotyping students and families into what we believe that their culture might be. Okay, the final thing that we're going to talk about before we end this part of the learning module is all the factors that affect second language acquisition. And I've talked about this a little so far, and I'd like for you to just read this through. These 10 different factors, these are within students and also around students, things that they can control and things that they can't always control. And it's very important when you think about your individual ELLs in your classroom, you consider if they're motivated. They may not really have wanted to come to this country. They may have left friends and family back home. They may feel really uncomfortable here. And the opposite may be true too. They may be really excited, staying in that honeymoon stage for a long time, really motivated to learn. So just like any students, we have the whole gamut. We talked about it earlier, but their L1 is really huge. What is their proficiency in their first language? That's going to really determine how quickly they acquire their second language. How much access they have to language. Do they have brothers and sisters at home who speak English? Do they watch a lot of TV? What's going on with that? Their age, there's research that says the window of opportunity for the brain really becoming proficient in another language without having an accent. Some people say 7 and 8, some people say early adolescence. There's different research out there that says different things, but overall, age can have an impact on how we learn. And I mentioned it before, motivation, but also attitude about the language. Maybe they don't like English. I've worked with students who do not like English, and so there's a lot loaded there. There's a lot attached to that. So really getting to know them and their attitude helps. Just like any student, their personality and their learning style is important to really understand. You can learn the learning styles of your students by having them self-assess or observing them and talking to parents and past teachers as well. It can be very helpful. Looking at who are their peers and their role models. Are their peers helping them, hindering them? What kind of relationships do they have socially? The quality of instruction, we can control this. This is huge. That's the goal of this course, is to really get you to think about what is it that you might not have been aware of previously in instructing ELLs and how you can potentially shift parts of your instruction that need to be shifted in order to reach the learners. Talks about culture, huge, and then the need. Do they really need to learn English? Do they care? Are their parents putting pressure on them? What's going on there? There's a lot of, there can be a lot going on with need. So what can we control? I definitely talked about quality of instruction. That's big. We can also give them more access to language by allowing them to talk in class and provide interactive cooperative learning environments. That is huge. We'll talk more about interaction later. We can help with their attitude of the language. We can lower that affective filter and invite them to practice in a really safe environment and take risks. We can get to know what's their first language development. We may not speak Albanian if that's their first language, but we can get to know by looking at their home language survey, talking to their ESL teacher, talking to their parents, what's going on at home, what is their first language like. You can easily research, say, Albanian online and learn some words and welcome that student in your classroom by trying and taking risks yourself in their first language. There's a lot you can do to nurture that. And then again, motivation, we can really help with students feeling good about themselves and motivating to learn more. So just a quick kind of graphic about where we want to be when we teach. We know that we want to keep learning cognitively demanding, but context embedded. So lots of context just for providing that comprehensible input, but high cognitive. We don't want to water it down and just do drills and basic exercises, or just keep it simple with social language. That's not going to work. That's not going to provide the rigor that we need. We also don't want to just do lectures and high-level questioning. We want to provide more access. This is huge, thinking about how students can be really hands-on. So this is where we want to live when we think about these quadrants of cognitive and context.